All right, welcome to our MLA style overview, making MLA manageable. MLA is a really crucial part of everyone's college experience. It is both a formatting and citation style. And so though I think a lot of people go into MLA feeling very overwhelmed, it's actually a really helpful guideline that's meant to help students cite information properly, order information properly in their papers. And so ultimately, even though it can feel overwhelming at first, it's actually, it can be manageable. And I'm hoping to just walk you through the basics tonight, answer any questions that you have. I'm hoping that this can be a really nice collaborative time, a time of community. And so feel free to just, raise your hand or ask questions throughout the evening as they pop up, because I definitely want to be addressing those. And if you're having that question, it's very likely that another student is also thinking of that same question. So I am going to pray and then we can begin. Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for this time tonight that we have to review MLA. I thank you, Lord, for writing and language and the ability to have knowledge and create papers and be able to share research findings, Lord. And we just thank you that the intelligent design of this universe just points us back to you, Lord. And we just thank you that we have the opportunity to learn, to progress as scholars. And I just pray, Lord, that as we go through our night, that we would just be having a great time of fellowship and learning more. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and we can jump right on into the presentation. Okay, so we're gonna go over a lot tonight. We'll be going over some MLA guidelines, formatting, the actual setup of the papers themselves, and then specifically in-text citations and works cited page questions. But I'd love to know, to begin, what do you guys want to get out of this? Are there any questions that you initially have right off the bat? Or is there anything, what has your experience been with MLA in the past? Did you use it previously? Is this all new to you? I'd love to just hear your initial thoughts and what you're hoping to learn tonight.
So I have a couple questions. Um, so I've submitted some papers. I've submitted all my papers. And on my works cited page, I didn't include a page number. I only included that in my insight text. But then as I'm going along, I saw somewhere that they were putting the page number in on the works cited page as well. Which one should I have been doing that? Both?
Sure. Are you referring to the page number of the actual document itself, like in the upper right-hand corner, like your last name and the page number, or page numbers within the
Oh,
citations?
so like if I'm citing Smith and Johnson
Hmm.
in the text, then I put
Yes.
70 for the page number.
Hmm.
And then I saw where on the works cited page, on the bibliography page, what we called
Hmm.
30 years ago,
Yeah.
that they were putting the page number along with the citation. So it was both in the text and on the works
Mhm.
cited page. And then I got confused because no professors ever deducted points. Which
Right.
way is correct?
Yes, that's an excellent question. So you'll only need to include page numbers when you're citing an academic article in a scholarly journal, because there are, or another work from an anthology. Like if you were citing like a poem in a literature anthology where there's like dozens of authors being cited throughout the book, you want to specify the page range of the work
Oh,
that you're citing. So if you're citing, so with the literature example, say you're citing a short story in like an American literature anthology, you'd cite pages, 70 to 79 in your works cited entry at the end of the paper.
okay.
Same thing goes for if you're citing an academic article published in a scholarly journal. Um,
Okay.
academic journals have multiple scholars that they're
Mm,
publishing multiple articles each, whether they publish annually or quarterly. In each edition, there are several different articles, and so you'd want to
Okay.
indicate um, your authors and the page range. It might be 10 pages, 15, 20, it might be 30. You'd want to
Okay.
just indicate that that is that source, which is housed within this much larger work.
Okay.
Uh,
So I'm just narrowing it down for them.
yes, but
Yes.
if you were
Okay.
citing a work by a single author, or even like a
Okay.
book written by multiple authors, and it's just one book, and that book from cover to cover is that one work, then you don't need to cite the page range because that
Okay.
would just be like 1 to 200 because you're working
Right.
with the whole book.
Right.
But when
Okay.
it's a work published within like a larger collection or journal, then you would indicate those page numbers in the works cited entry at the end of the paper. And,
Okay.
and as you rightly said, whenever you're citing in your in-text citation, you'll include those page numbers of the specific pieces of information that you're citing there.
Okay. Then I have a couple more questions.
Sure,
Sorry.
no
Um,
problem.
when I so I have a paper coming up, and well, I'm supposed to be creating a lesson, a Bible lesson to
Mhm.
share within a class.
Yes.
And I've been gleaning a lot of information from sermons on YouTube.
Mhm,
And I don't know, like, if what they're saying is truth.
mhm.
I mean, do I have to give credit to, if I'm speaking it, it's a presentation,
Yes.
and I wouldn't say, I mean, I can't imagine me saying, like, I got this from this pastor and I got this from this pastor, and
Right.
you know,
So when it comes to giving speeches, a lot of times you will attribute those ideas, those direct quotes, whether an idea or a direct quote, you can, say like as Pastor John Piper shares, da da
okay,
da, and kind of
right.
seamlessly just
Mhm.
incorporate it into the presentation. You always want to give credit where credit's due, even if you're not directly quoting, even if you're just grabbing ideas, you'll want to indicate where that is coming from.
Where I
And
got
you can
those.
also like at the end of the presentation, you can have like a works cited slide where
Okay,
you're citing, if those ideas are coming into play in your presentation, you can cite those there as well. And we'll go over actually how to specifically cite a YouTube video tonight.
okay, okay. And then I have one more question,
Sure.
really fast. One of my teachers sent this excellent little video from a resource from the Ally Center,
Hmm.
and it was Sway, and it was like,
Yes.
so now when I go to that link, it says it's not available. Is that gone?
Um, so we it's possibly being updated.
Okay.
It's kind of in the process of being reviewed, but we're hoping to get that back up and running as soon as possible.
Yeah, that was
Yes.
brilliant. My
Very, very
favorite resource.
useful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we're really hoping we're hoping to get that back up and running soon. It might
Okay.
be like updated, it might be in a slightly different form, but
Okay.
we are working on that. And
Good.
thankfully actually a lot of elements that were in that presentation will also be in this PowerPoint tonight.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
that's good too.
And you can send us this. Do you mind sending us this PowerPoint?
I can, yeah, sure.
Okay.
I can definitely share that with you guys.
Okay. Yay. Thank you. And that's it for now.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. And everyone feel free to chime in whenever questions arise.
Thank you.
Okay. So when we're thinking about MLA, it stands for the Modern Language Association. Um, it's a standardized formatting and citing resource, and so a lot of times it's used within the humanities discipline. So a lot of times in like your English, like literature and composition classes, writing classes. Um, there's even, I'm sure several of like your Bible and theology classes also use this. And that is mainly because there are different citing and formatting styles for different academic disciplines. And there's obviously a lot of overlap, but MLA isn't the only standardized formatting and citing resource, is really just the main point that I want to establish now. Like there's MLA, there's APA, Chicago, Turabian. So there's different styles and different academic disciplines, and MLA is just one of many, but it is the standardized um, citing style that many LBC undergraduate courses use. So that's not to say that you won't come into contact with other formatting styles, because you probably will, because it's good to be exposed and to use multiple citation styles, because depending on what career path you end up in, you might have to use a variety of styles. But MLA is going to be the foundational one for sure. So the main thing that is important to note going into MLA is that there are two types of citations that are required anytime you're citing an outside source. So whenever you're citing words, ideas, thoughts that are not your own, that are from another thinker, scholar, person, you want to cite that information where it appears in your paper. So in the sentences within the paragraphs of the body of your paper, or the introduction or the conclusion, you want to give credit where credit is due. And that looks like having an in-text citation. For MLA, MLA is a parenthetical citation guideline, which is just a really fancy way of saying those citations are going to occur with the punctuation mark parentheses. There are certain citation styles that use like footnotes and different things like that, where MLA footnotes are usually just used to provide additional information or context, but that's not for the actual citations themselves. And then the second type of citation that is required for MLA is a works cited entry. So for every source that you cite in your paper, there needs to be a works cited entry that appears on the works cited page at the end of the paper. So after all of the content is done, on a new page, it's a works cited page, and you will have the longer citation information for each source. So that's going to include not only the author's last name, but their first name, the title of the book or article, the container, so the academic journal that the article is published in. If it's an article, you'll have publication information, the year, all of those details are going to be on the works cited page, so that if someone wanted to do further research based on information that you presented, they could do so with that information. So both types of citations are required for each source to be cited properly. Each in-text citation specifies which information in the paper comes from an outside source. So you don't want to just not have any in-text citations, because then it's not clear what information is coming from you and what information is coming from a scholar, a pastor, theologian, or even, depending on the nature of paper that you're writing, you might be citing a variety of sources as well. But you always want to cite within the sentence outside information. And then each works cited entry details where one could find that source to do further research, as I just addressed. So we always want to have both types of citations to be for a source to be fully cited properly. And then when in doubt, cite it out. If information is very common knowledge, you don't need to have a citation. But if it's any information that's specialized, that might be like particular facts or statistics or quotes or ideas, you always want to cite, and it's always better to oversight than to undercite. Like, you want to really avoid any possible plagiarism. So you'll just want to make sure to be citing any information, any quote, any idea that comes from an outside source. Any questions about this first slide? I know it's like the first slide, but we've already covered so much information. So any questions so far?
Thank you. It sounds really clear. Will you be showing examples?
Yes, we will. We
Okay,
will
cool.
be showing examples as we progress. Yes.
Thanks.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a lot of terms, and there's a lot of overlap between the terms, so it can get confusing without those concrete examples. So we will definitely be looking through those as we go through. Okay, so stepping back from specific citations, we're just going to kind of look at the general format of an MLA paper. So standard 8.5 by 11-inch paper. Margins are 1 inch on all sides, which is usually already the pre-generated setting in Microsoft Word. Your font should be Times New Roman, size 12. The paper should be double spaced throughout. And then each page will have your last name followed by the page number in the upper right hand corner, which we're going to look at an example on the next slide. And then each paragraph is indented a ½ inch on the left. So for the first line of every new paragraph is indented because you want to indicate where you're starting each paragraph, how your ideas are flowing throughout the paper, how you're organizing your information around coherent ideas throughout the paper. So what this looks like is on the very first page, you'll have your first and last name, your professor's name with their title. So professor, last name, doctor, last name, depending on whether they're a doctor. And then you'll have the course code. You don't necessarily need the section, like, you might just have like LAN 101 or LAN 100 or BIB 106. You'll have the course code there. And then you'll have the due date of the assignment. So not the day that you personally complete the assignment, the day that the assignment is actually due in Canvas. And then it's formatted in the international date format. So it's day, month, year, no commas. And then in the upper right-hand corner, you'll have your last name followed by the page number, and that will appear on every page throughout your paper. Except if you have a title page, but MLA, usually you won't have a title page unless it's like a capstone project, or like a master's thesis or something. So very rarely will you ever have a title page. So that your last name and the page number should appear on every page. And then let me see if I'm missing anything else. The title will be centered above your first paragraph. And oh, one other thing about the last name and the page number. You don't want to just go into your header and type your last name space 1, because then page 1 is going to appear on every page. You want to go into Word and go up into the Insert tab on Word, insert page number, and select the according options from there. It's usually like the third option for the upper right-hand corner, and then it'll be 1, and then 2, and then 3, and so on and so forth. Any questions about any of this initial formatting?
I was just gonna say, yes, it is number 3.
Oh,
On
yes,
the,
thank you.
yeah.
Yep. Insert page number and then option number 3 for that upper right-hand corner. Very good, very good. Okay, yeah, we went over the general format, double space, 1-inch margins, size 12 font, all those good things. Okay, so now getting into the in-text citations. So the citations that appear within the sentences, within the paragraphs of your paper. So at the end of your sentence, before the end punctuation mark, which will usually be a period, you'll have the citation. So if the author's last name was Jones and the information could be found on page 5, you'll have Jones 5 in parentheses at the end of the sentence before the period. Excuse me. And then as much as is possible, you want to include the author's last name and the page number in every in-text citation. Now, of course, there's exceptions to the rule that we will review, but hopefully a majority of the time you have the author's last name and the page number. Why this is important is because when it comes to having credibility in academic writing, you want it to be clear that your information is coming from a credible source. You don't necessarily want to just be citing from a blog on the internet, because anyone can make a blog on the internet, but you want to be citing experts in the field in which you're writing on. So if you're writing about, the Bible or theology, you want to be citing scholars and theologians, and giving proper credit where credit is due. And then page numbers just really helps to specify where that information occurs within their publication, because obviously books, articles are very lengthy, and so you want to make it very clear where that specific information is coming from. It also provides a safeguard to representing scholars and thinkers well. You don't want to be just attaching someone's name to a claim that maybe he or she didn't actually make. You want to do your due diligence in that if you're saying that scholar John Smith said this thing, you want to be able to point to, oh yeah, on page 20 of his book, this is where he said it. You don't want to just be attributing any information to any old author, because you want to have integrity in your academic writing and be presenting those scholars well and correctly, and with proper citation. Now, this last bullet point is really important, and it can be a little confusing at first, but we'll kind of follow up in the rest of the presentation. Whatever appears in the in-text citation, so in that parentheses, should match the first word or words in the corresponding works cited entry. So for the example of Jones, so if it's or we'll go with say scholar John Smith. So if Smith is cited in the parentheses, so Smith page 50, on the works cited page, we want the first word of that entry to be Smith, so that it's very clear that this in-text citation corresponds to this works cited page entry. We don't want to have, Smith in the in-text citation and then start with the book title on the works cited page, because then it's not clear that those two actually match up. And that'll make a little bit more sense as we go on. So a few examples. So a work with one author, you'll have the author's last name, page number. When there are two authors for a work, you'll list both authors separated by and, have the page number. When there are three or more authors, which often occurs with like scientific, medical, psychological publications, you'll have the first author who's listed, followed by et al., which is Latin for and others, and then the page number. Because if there were 8 authors that worked on that published a certain study, to list all 8 would totally detract from the actual content of your paragraph. It would just be this really long list of last names, whereas here, Smith et al., you're attributing to the group of authors, and Smith should be the first author who appears on your works cited page, so then it's very clear that that source that you cited in the body of your paragraph corresponds to the works cited page entry at the end of your paper. Now, there will be times where large organizations, or not even large, sometimes small as well, will publish information, but there's not a single author that is credited. So for a large organization like the CDC, for example, they'll have articles on their website that you could cite, but there might not be a specific doctor named as the author. So there you would just cite the organization and the page number, because that would be considered a corporate author. Any questions so far?
I have a couple.
Okay, sure.
I'll make sure they're relevant. What if, so let's say Smith. What if Smith is citing John Piper, and he's got
Yes.
Piper's quote in there?
Excellent.
What do I do? Do I
Okay.
cite
I am
Piper? Do I
actually
cite?
Yes, I'm gonna pull up really quickly a Word document, because it's just gonna make more sense if I type it out, because if I
Yeah.
you'll end up citing both authors.
Okay.
But let me pull up this document. Okay, so if Smith is citing John Piper, there's a few different ways that you could do. There's a few different ways you could lead up to the citation, but basically, your in-text citation is either going to look like Piper quoted in, and quoted is abbreviated, Piper quoted in Smith, page 40. I know that's kind of long, but it attributes, then you're indicating, you're giving credit where credit's due, because the actual thought is coming from Piper.
Right.
But Smith is who led you to the quote, and who and the actual publication where you're citing it. So Piper was quoted in Smith on page 40. You could also write it as John Piper asserts that, and then you might go into the quote, yada, yada,
Okay.
yada. And then you could just do quoted in Smith 40. Because Piper is already in the sentence, it's already clear that you're citing Piper and also Smith.
I don't want to because I know you're teaching us. I don't want to get ahead of you. What about so I've had trouble if I have a big quotation in the text
Mhm.
and when it's like so many lines, maybe I should wait. It's so many lines, like 3
Mhm.
lines, so then it doesn't get quotations. I have trouble formatting that between
Yes, yes, yes,
top
yes.
paragraph and the bottom
Yeah.
paragraph. Um, should we talk
Yes.
about that now or later?
I do have a whole slide on block quotes, so
Okay.
we will get to that, but while we're in the Word document, I will just show you how to format that. Okay, so
Okay.
say you have your the rest of the content of your paper is up here.
Hmm.
You lead up to the quote with a colon, and we'll go over this on the slide.
Okay.
Say this is the content of your block quote, which obviously it isn't. Like, you'll highlight whatever text that the block quote is, and you're gonna tab, so that shifts the whole thing over so that you're not just tabbing the first line, but it's like the entire block of the
Hmm.
block quote you are shifting over underneath the paragraph in which it appears. And
So I
then,
put a colon. I put a colon that
yes,
this is my wording.
yeah,
I
you
agree with John
introduce, yep,
Piper.
yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yep. So yeah, you have your like on ramp to the quote where you're
Okay.
introducing the quote, the context, getting your priming your reader for the quote itself.
Okay.
You go into the quote, and we'll talk about the specific citing of the quote on the slide. But
Okay.
then
Okay.
when you explain the quote afterwards, you'll go enter and then backspace to bring your
Go back.
text, yes, back to the other side, and then it's
Okay.
clear that this is all housed within one
Okay.
paragraph.
This happens, a lot with Bible verses.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes. Yep.
so I'm always running into this. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Any other questions for now?
What if there is a general idea? Okay. So if there's a general idea in a book, say that we're reading a book about shalom, peace, or
Yes.
whatever.
Mhm.
And shalom, peace is repeated constantly in the book. I don't have
Yes.
to quote a page number and if I'm just generally quoting shalom, peace. Right? I mean, if I'm directly pulling
Yes.
it off a page, then I have to put a page number. But if I'm just
Yes.
generally talking about the author's idea of shalom,
Mhm. You would then just attribute like John Smith writes about the idea of shalom, peace in his work, da da da. But you could also, I also want to be clear that you can also be writing about like the biblical concept of shalom, peace
right,
generally in the whole
right,
paper. And then maybe you specifically cite Pastor John Smith writing about shalom, peace in this specific way. But yeah, I mean, it's not like just because, like, if it's like a biblical theological concept,
right, right,
no one has a monopoly on that, obviously. Like,
right.
uh,
Or let's say, like, I'm reading a book, Creative Bible Teaching. And
okay.
so the whole book is about creative Bible teaching.
Mhm.
If I am using it like this is what I don't know if that's a good example. Um,
Like if you're drawing on principles from the book, but not necessarily a
but I
specific
didn't know
quote.
it before I read the book. Like if I say
Okay. Okay. So if
it's
there
definitely not my idea, but I'm pulling it from just this overview of what I'm learning. What's another good?
but you had the thought before you read the book?
No.
Oh, no, you did not. Okay. But you're
Yeah.
citing principles that you learned from the book.
Yes. Yes.
Then you would still attribute like
I would say
author.
Smith, but I
Mhm.
wouldn't put a page because it's the whole book, right?
Correct, because at other points, you would still have the works cited entry
Mhm.
citing Smith and the whole book
Right,
because you're drawing from ideas. Because that
right.
would be an instance where you're paraphrasing, where you're not directly quoting, but you're
Mm,
talking about and
yes,
discussing ideas that he or she presents.
that's the perfect paraphrasing is,
Mhm.
yes, that's
Yes.
exactly what's
Yep.
happening. Because we're supposed to reflect on,
Yes.
and the reflection might be just the whole,
Work. Yep.
yeah, okay,
Yes,
that makes
definitely.
sense.
Great questions. Very good. Okay. So now we're going to get into if there are no authors or corporate author listed for in-text citations. You'll want to use a shortened version of the title of the work in the parenthetical citation. So, if it was like a shorter work, like just like an article. So say you're citing 20th century modernism amidst the landscape of the Great Depression, and that's like maybe the academic title of the article. You would then shorten it to just 20th century modernism because then your reader will know to go to your works cited page and see 20th century modernism amidst the landscape of the Great Depression. Um, and they'll find out more about the bibliographic information from the works cited page. But just to cite, if there's no author listed and there's no corporate author, um, you'll just cite the first few words of the title of the work. And if it's a shorter work, like an article or a poem, it'll be in quotation marks. If it's a longer work, like a book, it'll be italicized. But again, like this title might be The Arctic Tundra and the Plight of the Polar Bears in Northern Antarctica or something like that. Like that could be like the really long article. You would just shorten it. Well, if that would be the title of the book, you would then shorten it to just the Arctic tundra in your works cited um in text citation. And then the works cited entry at the end of the paper would have the full book title. Most times you're not gonna encounter this because most sources have an author, but it's always good to just go over this just in case there is not an author. So this is what your in-text citations would look like if there's no author listed. Questions about this? Okay, great. So a few more notes about in-text citations. If there are no page numbers, so sometimes there just aren't page numbers in a source, then you just list the author's name. Um, you know, include um kind of like what we talked about when we were talking about quoting another author. Same thing goes if you're just quoting one author. If you include the author's last name, it's called a narrative citation within like the narrative of your paper and the narrative of the sentence. Jones states, goes into the quote, then you can just put like page 73 in your quotation marks in your parentheses, because you already made it clear that Jones is the author that you're stating in that sentence. Once again, citations always go at the end of the sentence, and generally you want to avoid having two citations in one sentence so that it's very clear what information is coming from which source. And then I'm just going to check on the time here. Okay. I've been talking too fast. I need to slow down. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, in-text citations for the Bible. The first time you cite the Bible, you'll include whatever translation or version you're using of the Bible, in this case, the New Jerusalem Bible. You'll cite the book of the Bible in an abbreviated form, chapter and verse. So here you have the New Jerusalem Bible, Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 5 through 10. And notice how these are separated by, so like the abbreviation is followed by a period. The chapter and verses are separated by a period. Usually when we're just writing, we usually use a colon. But in MLA, you will use a period for that in-text citation. Now, for every subsequent in-text citation where you're citing scripture, if you're sticking with that same translation, you don't need to include the translation every time. So, later on in that paper, if you're quoting Revelation 4:6-8. Now, if you're writing a paper in which you're switching back and forth between various translations and versions of scripture, then each time you make a switch, you are going to indicate. So if you're going from the ESV to the KJV to the NIV to the NASB, like you'll be indicating that each time you switch between different translations. And yeah, an MLA has a list of abbreviations of the books of the Bible. A lot of times it's the first 3 or 4 letters followed by a period, but some of them it's a little bit different, like the book JAS period. So you'll just want to consult the MLA list of books of the Bible abbreviations just to make sure that it's accurate. Okay. Now, when we're incorporating citations and quotes into our papers, we want to, this is kind of more of a stylistic thing, but it's also just a really helpful writing tactic overall. You always want to be using the ICE method, which stands for introduce, cite, and explain. So you want to introduce the quote in some way. You don't always have to use the author's name because you also, that would get a little bit, dry if you were just always saying John Smith, John Smith, John Smith. Every time you're citing John Smith, it would just get really monotonous and kind of robotic. So you might say, in one sentence, you might say, John Smith asserts, da 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 da. But you also might, just be writing about the concept of biblical grace and da da da, and then just lead into the quote. And then at the end of the quote, obviously still cite Smith. But it's just really important to vary up your word choice. So I thought this graphic, was really helpful of just there's so many, and this is by no means an exhaustive list of all the different verbs that you can use when you're writing an academic paper. You can talk about how they reject an idea, they note something, they assert, they deny, and that it just helps to frame things for your reader, because when we just say so and so writes, so and so writes, so and so writes, it's like, okay, but like whenever you're writing a paper, you are framing information in such a way that you're trying to get the reader to, understand your thesis. So you're making a claim, and then in every paragraph after that, you're supporting that claim. And so when you're citing outside research to support your claim, you want to make it clear how you're using different information. Are you using that information as a counter argument or a refutation? Are you, are you using it? Are you saying like, this author starts in a good place, but I want to build on his or her points, or this author is mostly correct, however, they miss this crucial point. You just want to be really clear about your argumentative moves within a paper. So I know this isn't like directly MLA related, but I just wanted to include that in there because it's just really helpful to know about how to adequately incorporate quotes, and to do so in a really convincing and stylistically interesting way. And yeah, so this is just common signal verbs and phrases. Oh, and this is how it all ties back to MLA. You don't want to have what are called dropped quotes. So you don't want to just put a quote in your paragraph and just, you were writing a sentence, period, and then quotation mark, and then, because it's very confusing for your reader, because it's like, what am I supposed to do with this information? You want to frame it in such a way with these signal verbs and phrases what you're doing with that information. Like, do you, as I kind of just went through, do you agree with it? Do you agree with it mostly, but you're pushing back in some senses? Are you using it to directly support your point? Are you completely disagreeing with it, saying, look what this person says, however, this is flawed for X, Y, and Z reasons? And not in a, you're not being combative or sarcastic, but just really in a rhetorical way, picking apart what it is they're arguing and showing why their reasoning may be flawed. So just really important to remember those elements when incorporating citations and quotes. Okay, a little bit more on this. So 3 ways of incorporating citations. This was just a really useful resource from the Connors Writing Center. So we can think about obviously incorporating a citation at the end of the sentence. So where you're just paraphrasing information and you include it at the end of the sentence, you can have a signal phrase, according to Fisher, health education is required for high school graduation in Florida. You're attributing, you're putting the author in the sentence, that narrative citation. And then you can also do direct quotations. Lopez found that the effect disappeared within minutes, end quote, page number. So just, there's always different ways to be including your information, and it's just kind of helpful to vary it up so that it's not just the same thing over and over again. Okay, a few more elements of how to incorporate citations. So I think it's helpful and good to just be reminded that when we're quoting things, we don't necessarily have to quote full sentences. We can also quote like single words or single phrases that are helpful. Um, the author of the MLA Handbook for Writers of Research Papers writes, quote, only words, phrases, lines, and passages that are particularly interesting, vivid, unusual, or apt. Punctuate with a colon if the quote is uninterrupted, and place after a complete sentence. The MLA guidelines recommend that we keep quotations brief. Overquotation can bore your readers and might lead them to conclude that you are neither an original thinker nor a skillful writer. For variation or style, you may want to divide the quote with your own words. This is a really great way of doing things. You may paraphrase the original and quote only fragments, says Joseph Gibaldi, author of the MLA Handbook, making it easier to, quote, integrate quotes into the text. So I thought that was just kind of a helpful, some helpful guidelines about different ways to keep your writing interesting while also adequately and correctly citing information. Okay, so now to address questions about block quotes. So, block quotations are quotes that are longer than 4 lines when put into your paper. So sometimes it'll be like 4 lines in a book, but then it's only actually 3 lines when you type it up in Times New Roman, size 12, double spaced in your paper. Then that's fine. Then just keep it as a regular quote. But when it is more than 4 lines, you will format it in what's known as a block quote. So you'll place the whole quotation in a separate block of text, kind of like what we looked at earlier. You'll place the parenthetical citation after the end punctuation mark. So for every other in-text citation, it's inside the punctuation mark, but for block quotes, it's outside the punctuation mark. You don't include quotation marks for a block quote. It's kind of just like opposite of like so many of the other ways of quoting things. But this is how it's done. You'll introduce the quote. You might mention the credentials, especially if you're giving enough real estate in your paper to a block quote, you definitely want to make it very clear why you're using it, because you don't want to make it seem as you're just using it to fill space in your paper and that you're just trying to get to a page count or a word count. So you want every word to matter. And so if you're using a block quote, one, ideally use them generally sparingly. You don't want to have, one on every page of your paper. Definitely not. But then when you use them, make it clear exactly how you're using it. Just like any other information in your paper, you want it to be intentional. So you'll lead up to the quote, you'll include proper punctuation, usually a colon, and then you'll indent the entirety of the quote and punctuation, in text citation with the page number. And that is how you do block quotes. Any additional questions about this?
Did it used to be 3 lines? Because I've been doing 3 lines and nobody has counted off. I thought I got that from the Sway
Possibly.
video. The Sway. It's okay. I'm gonna take your word for it.
It might have been, sometimes it might have been more than 3 lines of poetry and 4 lines of prose or regular text. So that might be where the 3 is coming
Yeah.
from. But it is possible. I mean, every so often, we're on MLA 9. It is possible that in previous editions, though I'm not certain what it used to be, but currently it is more than 4.
More than 4.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so other quoting guidelines when it comes to MLA. Whenever you're quoting a quote, and you might find that, the first part of the quote is really useful. The end part of the quote is really useful, but there might just be like an additional few words or sentence in the middle where you're like, I really don't need this. But you don't want to like have you yourself don't want to quote it in a way that's really choppy. You can omit words from a quote and indicate it using an ellipsis, the dot space dot space dot space. You just want to be really careful to not change the meaning of the quote or misrepresent the author's words. As we talked about earlier, we want to have integrity in our writing and not just be like, throwing someone's name in our paper and attributing ideas to them, because that is not fair in the slightest, nor is it honest. So, but there will be times where, you find like the perfect piece of information, but you're like, I really don't need that sentence in the middle. So you can omit that with the ellipsis, um, which is just really nice because then and then it also helps you to be really, that you save a lot of space in your paper. You're being very economical in terms of the space of your paper, because you don't want to just have like random ideas or thoughts that maybe you're not addressing in the paper in your quote, because then it just seems like questionable why you would include that. And then say you have a quote that's really useful to your paper, but there's like a verb form that you need to change. Like maybe the verb is in, present ing form, and it doesn't fit within the flow of your sentence. You can omit or change a verb for, maybe you change it from ing to ed to past tense. To indicate like it, or if you need to like add a word like of something, like there's just sometimes where it doesn't fit in the flow of your sentence. If you need to add a word, you can do so with brackets, as long as you're just indicating that you are the one adding the word. Or if you need to change like the capitalization or something. But anytime you alter a quote in any way, you want to make it very clear to your reader, either with an ellipsis or with brackets. And then if you are quoting a quote within a quote, then you'll use single quotation marks within that quote to indicate any quoting or dialogue going on within the larger text that you are quoting.
And I would put, so back to the first one, the ellipsis,
Yes.
I would put dot, dot, dot. And then, so let's say we go with like, the quote is God so loved the world, and I'm just going to use so loved the world. Maybe you should make me an example.
Okay,
So
yeah.
then I would do dot, 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 and then I would do quote, so love the world.
Yeah, let me share my screen to the Word document. Yeah, I mean, you definitely like, okay, so say you're quoting John Smith intends that okay, so say the original quote is the sky, this is going to be really elementary. The sky is blue and the grass is green. The ocean is also blue. And that's like the original quote from the source. But you're just talking about the color blue. So you don't need and the grass is green. So you could delete and the grass is green. Have the ellipsis. The sky is blue. The ocean is also blue.
Oh, okay.
So that's how you would do that. And then if you really want to, make it flow, you could do that. So then you alter, like this was a capital T because in the original quote it
Oh,
begins a
I see. I
sentence,
see. Yeah.
but you're just stringing it together. You could just indicate that you changed the capitalization. The sky is blue. The ocean is also blue. Um, but you can also, especially because the quote I gave is such a simple one, you could also just take these two pieces of the quote and say, John Smith contends that the sky is blue and the ocean is also blue.
Okay.
So there's a few different ways that you could do that and still be doing it correctly. And of course, as always, you would want to.
What if I'm just taking a phrase out of, I'm trying to think of an example.
I think I might know where you're going. If you're just quoting a phrase, you don't need to always quote things within the entirety of their as long as you're not misrepresenting the author.
Okay.
So if you're just taking like a 3 or 4 word phrase, you can
Okay.
absolutely do that and include that.
I
As
don't need the ellipses. Or I
no,
do.
as long as you're not like, like you could just Smith writes that uh, I mean, if it's just like the sky is blue, it's okay that you don't also quote that he wrote about the grass and the ocean, as long as you're
Okay.
not, as long as you don't say John Smith only writes about the sky,
Right,
the
right, right.
ocean and the
Yes.
grass,
Okay.
because then it's
Yeah.
like, well, actually, he did write about the ocean and the grass if you look at the paper, if you look in the source itself. So as long as you're not misrepresenting, it's totally fine to just pull the information that's directly relevant to the content of your paper.
Okay. I think that makes sense.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
like a more complicated sentence would be
Yes, right.
like, um, I don't know, like if you just pull out a phrase from a long
Mhm.
sentence, I don't need the ellipses to just,
As long no, you don't need the ellipses as long as you're not, because the ellipses is really just to show that the ideas that you're quoting from like a passage of text. You
right.
took out some information and you want to make it crystal clear to your reader that information that you're omitting information that occurred in
Okay,
between those
okay,
pieces of
okay,
information.
okay. So
Uh,
if I omitted the beginning of a sentence and I'm only using the phrase at the end of the sentence,
mhm,
I just quote it normal. I don't need the ellipses. I'm
correct.
only using the
Correct.
ellipses to connect that there was something in the middle.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
yes, okay, I got
Yes.
it.
Very good. Yeah. Yeah. Again, as long as whatever your lead-in phrase to that quote is
Right,
not misrepresenting whatever the author is
right.
saying, then
Okay,
you're absolutely
okay,
fine.
okay.
Well, we have covered a lot of ground tonight. This is great. Okay, yes, so we finished this slide. Now on to the works cited page. So we've covered a lot of things about in-text citations. Now we're moving into the works cited page. Um, and okay, wow, we only have like 5 minutes left. I will probably go over time just so that I cover all of the content, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So if anyone needs to leave at any point, feel free to. Um, but okay, works cited page. So this comes at the very end of your paper after all of the content. It starts on a new page. So even if the content of your paper only ends partway down, let's say page 3, you'd still start your works cited page on page 4, the next page at the top. And then here's just a few guidelines of, for like a book, you'd have the author's last name, comma, followed by their first name, period, the title of their book in italics, period, the publisher, comma, year, period. And then, obviously a little more information is required for an academic journal. This is where we see the page range because it's a work published within a larger work. It's the title of the journal article within, might be a study of family counseling practices published in the American Journal or the American Psychological Association journal. Volume 12, number 1, something like that. And then like online article, you'll have like author's last name, first name, title of the article. And then again, the container follows the title so that like this article is housed in the container of a certain website or publication. And then you'd have the location, which for a digital source is a URL. And then if you're citing scripture, you'd have the title of the Bible that you're using, followed by the translation. You know, you might have like the Dr. David Jeremiah Study Bible, New King James Version, Crossway, and then like the year. I think I covered, oh, all of the citations should be in alphabetical order. So even if that's not in the same, it's almost never the order that you presented them in the paper, you want them to be alphabetical by whatever word appears over here. Again, usually the author's last name, but not necessarily. And then every citation should have, if it goes onto a second line, there should be a hanging indent. So here, this citation, this first citation is just on one line, so it's just one line. When it goes on to a second line, like this second citation, any subsequent lines are indented a ½ inch to make it clear that this information is housed under this source. So it just organizes the information. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's like a hanging indent because it's underneath the first line, which is farther over. So this is a helpful graphic, a helpful graphic organizer of the information that is included in works cited entries on the works cited page. Again, not all of this information is going to be required for every source, but this is just a general ordering of and description of what it is that's being cited in each category. So you'll start with the author, the source, the container, other contributors if there's any editors or translators. Excuse me. You'll have any version, number, publisher, publication date, location. And then it's just really helpful to like have these descriptions of what actually each one of those means. And again, this looks really overwhelming at first, but then I think kind of seeing it like on this page kind of helps because it just makes it seem a lot less overwhelming when you than when you just see this massive list. Okay, so here are a few examples of some works cited entries. So here would be a book with one author. You have the author's last name, the first name, period, the italicized title of the book, period, publisher, comma, publication year. Here's a book with an editor. So Jane Eyre is a classic work of literature, but it was edited by a scholar. So edited by Margaret Smith, Oxford University Press, 1998. Now here is a journal article which has a lot more information. So this is a journal article with two authors. So it's the author's last name, comma, first name. Well, yeah, Marchiel and Stephen Bishop. An author, you can just put first name first and last name second for that second author. And then you have the title of their article, which was published in the Journal of Applied Biomechanics, volume 33, number 4, August 2017, page range, and then the database where it can be found, EBSCOhost, and the URL where that publication is. Sorry, the spacing in the presentation mode kind of shifted this a little bit, but usually the university press would be shifted over a little bit. So you'd have the Bible, Authorized King James Version, Oxford University Press, 1998. And then a web page with an author, last name, comma, first name, the title in quotation marks, and then the it's housed in eHow, and then the URL. Yeah, and the spacing over here just got a little bit thrown off with the presentation mode, so I apologize about that. Okay, a web page without an author. So if you were citing something from the Purdue OWL, which is an excellent resource, by the way, for MLA. If you were just citing MLA formatting and style guide, that's just the title of the web page. There's no listed author, so it's just the title of the article. Excuse me. Which was published on August 2nd, 2016. And then you have the URL afterwards, which is the location of the source. Excuse me. And then for a YouTube video, okay. So here we have a YouTube video in which, so a speaker is presenting, so Jane, The title of the video is Gaming and Productivity. The container is YouTube, but it was uploaded by the Big Think channel. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. On July 3rd, 2012, and then a link to the YouTube video. So it can get a little confusing when it's like, okay, like you just want to give credit where credit's due. So like if it's like a really good example of this would be like a TED Talk where you would cite the speaker of the TED Talk, the title of the TED Talk, YouTube uploaded by TED Talk, and then the date and the URL. If you're citing a lecture from one of your professors, you'll include their first and last name, the title of the lecture, excuse me, and then the course, date, and then school, and then the format, which is lecture. Okay. Any questions on this slide? Sorry.
Do you recommend, so I've been using the Grammarly citation generator.
Okay.
Do you recommend doing that? Is it?
I personally don't. I think there's a lot of excuse me, citation generators that tend to either be behind on the version of MLA
Okay.
or just not savvy enough to actually adequately order the information.
Okay.
I think it could be used in the sense where like maybe you initially generate the citation and then you double check it with
Okay.
something like this,
Yeah.
but excuse me, the citation, like if you're going to use a pre-generated citation, I would really strongly really only recommend the ones from the LBC library,
Okay.
where you can
Yeah.
actually I'll pull that up now because that's a really excellent resource, especially because so many of your sources will be coming through the MLA, excuse me, through the LBC library anyway. Because that one, again, though you definitely need to double check because sometimes it's not, sometimes the computer can make mistakes. It is really useful. Excuse me. So if we go to the LBC library and say we want to find a source on the fruits of spirit, we find a source, we look through it, we really want to use it. We can go to this cite button, select that, choose our citation style, which in this case would be MLA, but it's great that they have so many other ones too if you ever need those. And then, and as it says, inspect citation data. For this book, it's really looking good. You'll just need to, when you copy and paste it into your document, you'll need to make sure that you change it to Times New Roman size 12 black ink, and then you'll need to format the hanging indent for that second if it goes onto a second line in your document. But you have, you know, the author's last name, first name, title of the book italicized, publisher information, comma, publication year. So books are a little bit more simple, but let's look at an academic journal article. These are all print books. Let me try to find an article. Let me specifically search. Let's go, spirit article. Okay. Okay. So here is an article that was published in Studies in Christian Ethics. So we can cite this. MLA is already chosen. And here we have, which this one's looking good. You know, last name, comma, first name, title in quotation marks, journal, Studies in Christian Ethics, volume 24, number 3, 2011, page range, DOI. Again, I mean, this actually looks really good. Sometimes the library citation generator, sometimes it doesn't have the the database, or sometimes it'll just say like no data in all caps, like in the middle of the citation. So obviously you don't want to include that in your citation. You'll want to figure out what data the computer wasn't able to grab and go in and fill that in. But yeah, when it comes to, so a very long-winded answer to your question. When it comes to citation generators, no, I would not recommend like regular online generators, but if it's through the LBC library or one of the LBC library databases and you use one of the citations, usually those are pretty accurate. Again, you'll always need to double check, but these do save you a ton of time because it's like it just takes so much time to go in and get all that information. But once you know what to look for, it really does help a lot, and then you can double check it for accuracy.
So should I worry about previous papers that I use the generators? And what if there's a
Um,
mistake? And
like looking back, grace abounds, and so if you look
yeah,
back and you were citing the material to the best of your ability at the time, and
yeah,
so if your professor had a question, he or she would have reached
they
out.
would have already. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, definitely do not sweat. You were
Okay.
doing what you could to cite it.
Okay.
Um, and and truthfully, like, there's so many little elements that are required. Like people make mistakes and that's okay. This is a learning process. The biggest thing is avoiding like outright plagiarism where you're like
Right, right.
not
Okay.
citing the source or something like
Yeah.
that. But
Okay.
definitely don't worry about that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we are almost done. Thank you guys for hanging in there and staying a little bit late.
Sorry
Um,
I had so many questions.
oh no, no, no. You prompted a lot of great discussion, so that was super helpful. I'll go to present mode. Oh, I'm so sorry. It keeps on starting over. Let me Okay, so we had pretty much finished this. Yeah, so tonight we talked about MLA formatting, page formatting, citations, incorporating those citations and the works cited page. Um, any questions? Any key takeaways?
It was so good. Thank you, Professor Khan.
Absolutely.
The questions are good because you need it, so don't worry about the questions. It helps us learn. So I'm just want to make clear this the work site
Hmm.
page. You said it does not have to go in order of how you're doing your paper. It just goes in alphabetical order of your authors.
Correct. Yeah, the alphabetical order of whatever appears first, which again is usually going to be the author's last name, but like for like the title of the Bible, you put, if it's like the Holy Bible, you would put that with the T's or wherever the T would go in your alphabetical
Okay.
order. But yes, thank you for the
Okay. So
clarifying question. Yep.
yeah. So like if we have several people's names with A, they would
Hmm.
show up in alphabetical order.
Yes.
The Bible, excuse me, title of the Bible would just be under where the T's start.
Hmm. Yes. And a lot of times, depending on the length of works cited page, like obviously you're not going to have all the letters of the alphabet represented, probably not.
Right.
No, but you'll just go in the general order. Like it might go from, you know, D to W, but as long as it's in alphabetical order of, the A authors and then the B's and C's and so on, and so forth. But yeah, definitely always alphabetical order.
And with the generator, because what I realize is that as you look at the library generators
Mhm.
for the MLA style, it becomes memorization, honestly. Like if you
It
start to
really
see
does.
familiar with it, right? So my thing is I would think that it would be wise to cut and paste them on a page on the side as I'm doing my paper
Hmm.
and then compare it to what you say it should look like and do both, correct?
Yeah, so you can definitely use the citation generator through the LBC library. Yeah, and then something that's just really helpful is, I mean, you could even check it by, I mean, this slide in and of itself
Yes.
really covers a lot of the grounds of like, okay, if I'm dealing with a book, do I
Yep.
have the author's last name, comma, first name, period? Is the title of the book italicized? Do I have the publisher and the year? Period.
Right.
For a journal article, again, that's going to be a little bit more involved where you have the author or authors, title of the journal article in quotation marks, title of the journal itself, italicized, volume, number, publication date, page range, and then I will say, usually you'll have the location that would probably be like the DOI number or the URL after the page, like comma, excuse me, the URL and then period.
Oh, we should include the URL?
Yes, for digital sources, yes,
Okay.
electronic ones,
When you-
yep, yeah.
when you
And
print
then
it-
you can also go by, this is gonna be the most thorough indication, because this has like everything you could possibly include for pretty much for the works cited. So that last part is the location. Where is it found? Page, URL, DOI.
Cool. So yeah, that's a great chart. When you print the paper out, you know how it prints in color, the URL, should it always be black?
You know, that's a great question. I don't know that there's a standard. That would be something to look into actually, because I actually do not know the answer to that. I don't know that it necessarily matters either way. I mean, if it's still the hyperlink, especially if you're like submitting the source to Canvas, I mean, then your professor can just click on it from there if he or she wants to do further research into your
Okay.
source. So I don't know that there's necessarily a strong preference either way. As
Okay.
long as though, but the rest of your paper, the ink should all be black.
Right. Okay, yeah, because sometimes it does it automatically. So sometimes I'm
Mhm.
wondering, okay, do I have to save it, make it all
Yes.
and print it again?
I would say though, if you're printing it out and turning in like a hard copy, I would make it black ink.
Okay. Okay, great. That's what I know. I just went old school. I don't even know we do that.
No, but that's it's a great question. I think if you are turning in a hard copy, black ink would be preferred because yeah, you can't, it's a piece of paper, you can't click on it. So I would definitely go with the black ink there.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, all right. Well, if no one has any further questions, I just wanted to thank you all for being here and just know that you can always make one-on-one appointments with the Ally Center. If you have any additional questions about this, we can definitely work one-on-one. The Ally Center has a lot of other workshops as hopefully you're aware, there's a lot of other topics and things that are presented throughout the month that are useful to students. So thank you so much for being here. I'll stay on for another minute or two if anyone has any additional questions, but I'll turn off the recording. But thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yes.